Wilhelm Reich, How to Heal the Earth Bioenergetically. The Rainmaker. Misjudged, frowned upon, and forgotten by the public. The ingenious researcher Wilhelm Reich died 50 years ago. Berlin's Professor Bernd Senf sheds light on the man's explosive weather experiments and documents how the latest research results impressively confirm Reich's desert greening. By Professor Bernd Senf. The 50th anniversary of Wilhelm Reich's death once again gave the media cause to more or less mock him and his work, a pattern that had already followed him for decades during his lifetime. In particular, laughter is often provoked by the offhand reference to the late Reich as a rainmaker. From psychoanalyst to rainmaker, this person must have gone completely mad, and the question then only remains why and when. His scientific discovery. Research on and use of life energy, or orgone in humans and nature, still seems like a red flag to many. Even on the internet, one encounters the claim that Reich's orgone research has long since been scientifically refuted, while research results that confirm essential parts of his research are often consistently ignored. After almost 40 years of dealing with the complete works of Wilhelm Reich and establishing contact with many Reich researchers from all over the world, however, it can be said with conviction that his research up to his late phase in the 1950s is to be taken very seriously. This includes his life-energetic understanding of weather patterns and climate change, and the methods he developed for healing the bioenergetically severely diseased organism Earth, which have since been repeatedly confirmed in an impressive manner. The question of the moving power of human emotions led the psychoanalyst, Freud student, sexologist, and founder of body psychotherapy to the discovery of life energy in 1938, which could not be adequately described in conventional physical terms. Reich coined the term orgone, or orgone energy. He recognized the free flow of this energy in the human organism as an essential basis of physical and mental health and self-regulation. In the blockage and/or fragmentation of the energy flow, he saw a deeper cause for a wide variety of functional disorders, which can also turn into organic diseases, up to and including cancer. In the context, he coined the terms character armor, body armor, and biopathy, i.e. bioenergetic disease, and developed therapeutic methods to loosen them up, with the aim of regaining buried vitality and self-regulation. Discovery of the bions. For all the differences between the human organism and other living beings, right down to the living single-celled organism, Reich discovered a common functional principle in the spontaneous flow and pulsation of the cell plasma, and the underlying life energy. According to this, the essence of the living organism does not lie solely in the substantial material structure of the cells or the body, but in the unity of material substance and the life energy that moves, flows through, and around it. In connection with research into biogenesis, the origin of life, Reich discovered tiny vesicle-like transitional forms in the border area between non-living and living substance under the light microscope in Oslo in 1938, which he called bions, and which revealed a bluish glowing radiation field in and around themselves. Reich interpreted these radiation fields as a manifestation of the life energy orgone, which he regarded as the basis of natural self-organization, the constructive force in nature. His deep insight into the living aspects of the microcosm was later complemented by a corresponding life energy approach and interpretation of the macrocosm. Thus, he also saw common energetic functional principles between the human organism and the living organism Earth. and this decades before James Lovelock published his Gaia hypothesis. The material structure of the planet Earth was also flowing through and around cosmic life energy, which moved in large-scale vortices, carrying masses of air and water vapor with it in the atmosphere. The inner view of this life energy field appears to us as a blue sky. The outer view from space shows the Earth as a blue planet. On some satellite images or photos from space, the bluish radiation field of the Earth is clearly visible, but it is often filtered out. If the Earth's life energy field is blocked, precipitation will also fail to appear. Wilhelm Reich had already found out in his research of the human organism that bioenergetic solidification can lead not only to functional disturbances, but also to structural decay of the cell tissue and cells affected by it. A functionally identical process can also take place on the organism Earth. If, for example, the life energy field of the Earth is blocked over a wide area, low-pressure vortices do not flow through these areas, and thus the corresponding clouds do not rain down. Instead, the vortices bounce off the blockage and disintegrate in their structure, with parts of the cloud fields moving in a large arc northeastwards and other parts southeastwards around the area in question. Structured clouds do not form on the spot either, so precipitation stops altogether. If this condition becomes chronic, then a drought develops, which eventually also causes the structure of vegetation to disintegrate, and in the long term, even the structure of rocks through erosion. The end result of such a process would be a desert that spreads like a tumor, further and further into the periphery, and absorbs previously fertile land. The structural decay as a result of life energy solidification even involves the water molecules. H ions and O ions are formed from them, from which acids on the one hand, acid rain, and ozone on the other, smog, are formed. The energetic solidification of the atmosphere would thus be the main cause for the loss of water, beyond evaporation and vaporization, and the drying out of air and soil. Incidentally, Reich called the solidified life energy door, or deadly organ. In the atmosphere, the door shows itself in a gray veil over the landscape and/or in the sky, which sensitive people perceive as lifeless and oppressive. Within this veil, there are no clearly structured clouds, but at best grayish-brownish streaks, which Reich called door clouds. The sun sometimes appears behind a door veil only as a dull and pale disk, and sinks at sunset already far above the horizon, without any glow and afterglow of the sky, as if in a gray soup. When well-structured clouds of clear sky move into a door haze during the day, they lose their structure and disintegrate within a few minutes, and often only dirty and dull-looking door streaks remain. He who has eyes can see. Anyone can observe such phenomena with their own eyes in appropriate weather conditions, but few seem actually to do so, and even fewer seem to be aware of their fundamental importance in the context of drought and desertification. In his Orgone experiment, Reich found out in 1951 in his laboratory in Maine that organ energy can also enter a state of overexcitation, which results in other disease symptoms than energetic torpor, among others, leukemia. The Orgone effect, as he calls it, is caused by the action of radioactive radiation on the life energy, as if it were whipped up like the sea in a spring tide. And this effect, like the organ energy in general, penetrates all matter, including any shielding intended to protect against radiation. This also explains why there is a high incidence of health and environmental damage in the vicinity of nuclear power plants, such as childhood leukemia or forest decline. Atomic bomb explosions, also underground, and the opening of uranium mines, especially in open-cast mines, are further causes of overexcitation of the Earth's life energy field, and thus also of global warming. The problem of electrosmog. In the meantime, there is also clear evidence that electrosmog, for example from mobile phones, neon lights, screens, computers, and microwave ovens, produces an Orgone effect. It is common knowledge that microwave ovens heat food. Why then should it be any different for the Earth, which is now like a global microwave oven due to mobile telephony and other electromagnetic fields, all of which are still being expanded? In the current debate on climate change, however, these connections have so far been almost completely ignored, and grotesquely, nuclear energy is suddenly regarded as climate-friendly. According to Reich's observations, the Orgone effect of energetic overexcitation can turn into the opposite of energetic solidification, DOR. Apart from that, the Orgone effect hits a living organism or a living system particularly hard at its bioenergetic weak points, i.e., in the areas of the strongest energetic blockages or congestions. The weak points of the Earth would thus be the large desert areas, which react to any stronger Orgone effect with assaults on their periphery in the form of dangerously severe droughts and heat waves or heat storms, resulting in threatening forest or bushfires. James DeMeo, who founded a private research institute, the Orgone Biophysical Research Laboratory, in the tradition of Reich in Green Springs near Ashland, Oregon, in the USA, has been able to observe corresponding correlations between nuclear events and climate catastrophes for decades, and has reported on them in detail in his journal Pulse of the Planet. Consequences of Chernobyl. After Chernobyl, such a connection also became clear in Europe. At the end of April or beginning of May 1986, for example, there was a completely unreal clear sky and glistening colors in Berlin as a manifestation of the Orgone effect, and a few weeks later, the atmosphere and the landscape changed into a gray haze and lifelessness. Large parts of Europe, which had been characterized by clear and varied weather for most of the previous decades, were then buried under a gray veil for years, and smog situations became more frequent, even leading to smog alerts with driving bans in some cities. Another example was the 1998 nuclear bomb tests in India and Pakistan, which were followed by dramatic heat waves and drought disasters in these and neighboring countries. The increasing severity of storms can also be interpreted in terms of Orgone energy. Just as very destructive discharges of pent-up energy can occur in emotionally and physically strong armored people, the widely congealed atmospheric life energy could be broken up by violent hurricanes. The stronger the solidification, the more severe the outbreaks of violence. This seems to be a common functional principle in the individual human being, in the social organism of a society, and in the living organism Earth. The connections only briefly indicated here suggest that the Earth, in addition to the generally known environmental stresses, is also seriously ill bioenergetically. Reich already saw these connections clearly in the 1950s. But instead of listening to his warnings and taking up his revolutionary and forward-looking bioenergetic methods of treatment for humans and the environment, he was put in jail in the USA, and his books were officially burned. To this day, he has not been vindicated. With climate change worsening, this often derided part of his research is also more topical than ever before, only hardly anyone wants to admit it as yet. Reich has not only uncovered and documented deeper causes for the blockage of the atmospheric life energy and its connection to drought, desertification, and smog, but has also developed effective methods of treatment against it. With the application and further development of these methods, It now seems possible to stop the spread of deserts and even to turn deserts back into fertile land and reclaim them as the basis of life for humans, animals, plants, and water. With Reich's method, it seems possible to stop the spread of deserts. Healing the sick earth. Reich's life energy weatherwork is based on a general operating principle of all living processes, which can be condensed into the following sentence. The dissolution of the blockage is the solution, gently, not violently. To resolve the blockage of atmospheric life energy, Reich has developed a device with which an organ energy suction can be generated. Metal tubes, metal hoses, and a connection to fresh living water play an essential role here. Details of the construction and handling are deliberately not discussed here, because the use of this device only belongs in the hands of bioenergetically experienced and responsible persons who have familiarized themselves in detail with Reich's weatherwork and its organ energy principles. The device unfortunately looks very similar to a Stalin organ with which rockets can be fired, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with it. The idea is not to create an explosion, but to stimulate a gentle and silent flow of energy without any of the conventional energy drives. Known from school physics and engineering, such as electricity, gas, petrol, or diesel. According to Reich's findings, there is a relatively strong mutual attraction between water and organ energy. Accordingly, clouds do not form solely from the presence of water vapor and humidity, but from energy condensation in the atmosphere, which in this respect stand out from their surroundings. The energy condensations exert a stronger attraction on the water vapor than the energetically weaker surroundings, and thus also cause a condensation of the water vapor, which appears to us as a cloud from a certain degree of density. A cloud would therefore also be a unity of material substance, or water vapor, and compressed organ energy. If organ energy is withdrawn from the cloud by a directed suction, and its organ field is equalized to the level of the environment, the special attraction to the water vapor is lost, and the cloud dissolves. Because Reich was able to specifically dissolve clouds with this device, he called it cloudbuster, and the use of the device in general, cloud busting. Unfortunately, these terms are somewhat misleading, because the device was later used with a different procedure, primarily to stimulate cloud formation and rainfall in drought areas, and to clear the atmosphere in door and smog situations. Incidentally, Reich later used the abbreviation OROP for energetic weather work. Here, you can see weather experiments in Nambia in 1993, conducted by James DeMeo. Celestial acupuncture. The term celestial acupuncture probably describes the method more precisely, in analogy to acupuncture in humans. Here, as there, the aim is to use a comparatively simple instrument, applied gently and in the right doses at the right time and in the right place, to restore a disturbed flow of vital energy and thus stimulate the self-healing of the organism concerned. The Reich cloudbuster could therefore also, and perhaps somewhat less misleadingly, be called a celestial acupuncture device, namely the variant that generates an energy suction and can thus bring movement into a previously congealed energy field. In this way, previously solidified door would become living, pulsating, and flowing life energy. Similar to the thawing and melting of ice, which thereby becomes flowing water. Whereas previously, due to the energetic solidification of the atmosphere, there was a structural disintegration of water molecules and a corresponding drying out. Water molecules can form again in flowing organ energy, so that the humidity rises again, from which clouds can also form and build up on the spot, up to and including rain. Wilhelm Reich used the method of cloud busting, or celestial acupuncture, as early as the early 1950s in the USA, initially to clear up a depressingly murky and dull-door atmosphere in the vicinity of his rural home and laboratory in Rangeley, Maine. This was followed by deployments of the device to produce rain, the success of which was reported in the local press at the time. Later, he traveled with a team and appropriate equipment to the Arizona desert. There, he was able to dissolve a widespread energetic blockage of the atmosphere. As a result, low-pressure vortices flowed in with corresponding clouds and heavy rainfall, the likes of which had not been experienced there in living memory. The desert landscape, which had been completely arid until then, began to revive and to become green again. This laid the essential foundations for a regreening and revitalization of dried-out areas, for a reversal of the expansion of deserts, and for a widespread healing of the organism Earth, which had become bioenergetically ill.
He said he'd bring us an inch of rain for $1,000. And I said, well worth it. And the next morning he called and he said, Mr. Reich wouldn't guarantee an inch, but he would guarantee rain. And so we said, go ahead, just the same. So on the Monday morning, still was no rain, and he came through from Rangeley with his equipment and set up at Graham Lake. Right here, it was on a truck, big truck. He set it right here and ran something into the water. I supposed to ground it, and he picked up at noon and left. And it was still clear, but these funny clouds are going. Then that evening, or that night, around midnight, we got a quarter of an inch of rain all through this section within a radius of probably 25 miles.
Mit einer Wetterexpedition nach Arizona macht Reich einen letzten Versuch zu beweisen, dass die Orgone-Energie existiert und ein Mangel davon in der Atmosphäre die Wüstenbildung vorantreibt. Mit dem Cloudbuster will er Regen erzeugen und die Wüste zum Blühen bringen.
Mein lieber Reich, jemand hat mir gesagt, dass es dir gelungen sei, in Arizona Gras an Orten hervorzubringen, wo es seit Menschengedenken kein Gras mehr gegeben hat.
Mein lieber Neil, in Arizona habe ich großen Erfolg gehabt. Dort habe ich einmal wirkliches Funktionieren von Selbstregulierung in der Natur beobachten können. Man braucht den Boden nur zu einem gewissen Grad von DOR, Deadly Organ Radiation, zu befreien und schon funktionieren Boden, Atmosphäre wieder. Das ist in Arizona, wenn auch zunächst nur im Experiment, in einem Umkreis von 50 Meilen gelungen.
2 years in prison. Reich's incredibly hopeful research was, however, abruptly interrupted by the legal proceedings brought against him by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, which ended with his being sentenced to 2 years in prison, and with the prohibition of his organ research, as well as the burning of his books and journals. As far as they concerned the discovery, research, and use of organ energy, or even only referred to it. The court also ruled at the time that organ energy does not exist. The method of energetic weatherwork, cloud busting, or core, was only taken up and contributed many years later by a number of people. Charles Kelly, Richard A. Blasband, Jerome Eden, Trevor Constable, James DeMeo, and others. Since then, James DeMeo has had the most experience in this field, having worked in various parts of the USA, Europe, Israel, and Africa. The November 1991 mission to Israel saw heavy and widespread rainfall across much of the Middle East after years of increasingly threatening drought and water shortages. While the water reservoirs were almost completely depleted before the operation began, the rainfall replenished them to the brim. The weatherwork in Namibia in November 1992 and February 1993 ended a drought that had been spreading from the Namib Desert since the early 1980s. The onset of the drought coincided with the opening of one of the world's largest open-pit uranium mines, suggesting a resulting triggered or amplified Ordener effect, the overexcitation of atmospheric vital energy. Heavy rains. Unlike other drought and desert areas covered by a dull door haze, for example, Eritrea in 1994, Namibia had an almost unreal clarity and brilliance of color even before the cloud-busting operations, suggesting an Orgone effect. After a series of operations in different locations, moving from the periphery to the core of the Namib Desert, there was heavy and extensive rainfall over much of Namibia and a relaxation of the previously overstressed atmosphere. The author of this text participated in the 1993 mission himself and was deeply impressed by the effect of the weatherwork and the noticeable revival of nature. On another visit to Namibia in February 2000, the previously dried-out landscape was hardly recognizable. Rivers and lakes were filled with water again, and the landscape was lush green once more. In the Etosha Pan National Park, whose huge lake had dried up completely during the drought, and where a vast number of animals had died of starvation and thirst, the animal population had regenerated. The longest project of energetic weatherwork so far, led by James DeMeo, took place in Eritrea between 1994 and 1999. It involved 2 missions per year, each lasting 2 to 3 weeks. I was an eyewitness. I myself was present at the first mission in June 1994 and was again able to gain a convincing impression of the almost unbelievable effectiveness of this method. While at the time of our arrival in Eritrea, the country was completely parched by a drought that had been intensifying for more than 15 years. The first rains began just 2 hours after the start of the celestial acupuncture. In other areas and cases, the effect often only occurs several days after the first application. Only in 1 of the 6 years, namely 1996, was no weatherwork carried out, and it was precisely in this year that the rainfall dropped significantly again, until the following year when the project was successfully continued once more. Unfortunately, due to the resurgence of war between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the project had to be discontinued in 1999. When I visited Eritrea again in 1997, the country, which had previously been completely arid and covered in a dull gray veil, was covered with lush green meadows and fields of grains and vegetables. The atmosphere had been refreshed and cleared up, and the rivers and lakes had been abundantly filled with water again, or had been newly created. In 2000, news reached us that as a result of the abundant rains of the past years in Eritrea and neighboring areas, the Nile was carrying such an unusual amount of water that Lake Nasser in Egypt, dammed by the Aswan Dam, yielded an overflow for the first time, which was diverted westwards into the Sahara. This created 4 large lakes in the middle of the desert, one roughly the size of Lake Boden. These lakes can still be seen today on Google Earth on the internet. In my book, The Rediscovery of the Living, I placed the weatherwork of Reich and DeMeo in a larger context of life energy research. Later, the ideas for future projects of bioenergetic revitalization of the atmosphere, soil, plants, and waters emerged. Pioneering project in Algeria. Meanwhile, Madjid Abdellaziz, a German Algerian living in Berlin, has launched a project for desert greening through integral environmental healing at the northern edge of the Sahara in Algeria in 2004, which may become pioneering. In an area where previously there was only sand, stones, and drought, the combined applications of these methods has already led to impressive beginnings of greening, clearing of the atmosphere, cloud formation, and rainfall. In the middle of the desert, fruit and vegetables can now be harvested, and the planting of trees is progressing. Here, too, I was able to see the hopeful beginnings on the spot in summer 2007. Wilhelm Reich died in prison 50 years ago. But despite all the scorn and ridicule that was poured out on him, and the court decision that organ energy does not exist, after decades of research, we can say with a clear conscience, it does move, the cosmic life energy. In its careful use lies the key to healing the seriously ill Earth and to effective climate protection. Here you can see how this technology was used in Algeria for desert greening in 2007. Risks in dealing with cloudbusters. Professor Bernd Senf considers it irresponsible to call for reckless use of these or similar devices, as is being done particularly in the so-called chembuster scene of Don Croft and George Ritchell. Celestial acupuncture in connection with a cloudbuster must never become a tool for weather modification per se, to conquer the weather and subordinate it to one's own will. This concept of modification is as alien to that of celestial acupuncture as rape is to loving sexuality. The spherical harmonization system and the cloudbuster are simply aids to nature, a gentle helper used only at the right time and place. When the natural process of atmospheric pulsation is blocked and stagnation sets in, the devices find their application exclusively in order to dissolve the blockages of the natural function, in order to restore the natural self-regulating processes of atmospheric pulsation.